early days of hot rodding, being around people who pretty much were involved in it at that time, street racing and street rods, and there were no really places for us to go other than we would go to the different drive-ins, and we'd see people there with nicer cars and hot rods and performance engines, basically, of the era. And in my case, it was back in the 50s. That was in the era of drive-ins where you could go for. They had car hops and they had things there at that time. And this is, again, I'm basing it in the Southern California area. And there were a lot of places for us young people to go that were interested in cars. They had a common interest, and that's kind of where we gathered. And each evening there was either one place to go to or another, and that's how it evolved. And from there, on the weekends, they would go to the local drag strips, and there were several in the early days, basically, which don't exist today, but there were several to go to. Where the city of Valencia is an example. They had a drag strip in the outlying area of Valencia, which was called Saugus Drag Strip, but that no longer exists. It's all new homes now. And then San Fernando Valley was all by. That drag strip was near Whiteman Airport. That was quite a place. That was, and that doesn't exist any longer. But it was there for the young people at the time. It was for young people to go to it. So, and there was other strips in Fontana, which is basically near the steel mills. And at that time, it's changed. It still has the same name, but there's been 3 types of drag strip there. Well, in the early days, we basically had a regular street car and with a hopped-up engine in it, and then we would go to these events, and that was the same car we drove on the street. But as time progressed, we got interested in going faster, and then we started getting involved with a car that was modified. And when I say modified, it was an early vintage car, and in my case, it was a 1933 Ford Coupe that had the motor pushed back in the driver's compartment almost, and we sat in the middle of the car, and that's pretty much what we had. We had an altered coupe, is what it was called, and it did double duty, actually, that particular car. We ran the drags on weekends, and then when the dry lakes time came, at that time it was another sanctioning body called the Rosetta Timing Association. And we ran the car there. The same dry lakes. It was the El Mirage dry lake bed that we ran at that time. So that's pretty much where we started racing and seriously. And then from that coupe, running the drags, and from El Mirage dry lakes, then we got into even further into the racing scene by basically wanting to build what was called then, in those days, a top fuel dragster, where the motor was up front. It was a series of tubes welded together, which they called it a slingshot in those days. And then we would put a performance engine that we thought was the best. And there were certain ones that seemed to be the best at that time, and was made by the Chrysler company. That it was a hemispherical designed cylinder head, which was a Chrysler engine, and we took those engines basically from the wrecking yard and cleaned them all up and improved upon the parts as best we knew how, because they at that time weren't really any engine builders or sophisticated parts manufacturers in that era. So we used to run what we got out of the wrecking yard. And, of course, we then got involved with exotic fuels, which was another thing that we had to learn about. But that was pretty much how we did it. I think that if I have to look at when it all started, it started before my time. I think that the real hot rodders started in basically the 30s and the 40s, and then in the 50s there was another generation that picked up from where they left off, and then in the 60s, that's my generation. That's when we started doing things, and that's how it pretty much evolved. First of all, drag racing was very time-consuming and very expensive. It evolved to that. In the last car that we had, there were 3 of us involved with the car. 2 of us owned the car, and in one we had a driver. In those days, the joke was that we had to rent a driver, and he drove several different cars for several different people, and that was how we approach things. And then one weekend when we weren't running the car, he would be in somebody else's car driving that car. So that was pretty much how that evolved.